Good morning again. I am here to introduce our first speaker of the day. You may already know Paul. I know I've been following him and reading his LinkedIn posts, reading his thoughts for a while now, and it's a pleasure to actually get to meet him and introduce him to the DEF crowd. So Paul is the director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency at Headquarters Department of the Army, Chief Information Officer. He's responsible for assisting in the development of strategy, use, and optimization of cloud resources, including the areas of cybersecurity, data protection, commercial capabilities, and ensuring the network can support the current and future Army force. So that's a lot, and some of us still don't really know what the cloud is. I think that joke is not old yet. But Paul has had a really distinguished career across the public and private sector. In the government, he's also served at the NGA. And I've snuck a look at his presentation ahead of time this morning, so I know we're in for a good ride. Let me just tell you, there are some memes and there's some Ted Lasso. So remember to put your thoughts in the chat, share your thoughts with the audience as we go along, and you can also drop questions in the Q&A tab. We'll have some time to ask Paul questions at the end. With that, Paul, welcome to DEF2021.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike, and thanks for having me. So hey, Def, I just want to say thank you for spending a little bit of Saturday morning with me. I'm really honored to be here. I'm really excited to talk about this topic this morning. As you can see, the title is How to Eat the Culture Elephant here in 5 bites, and we're going to unpack that because obviously it's going to take more than 5 individual bites, but more so the 5 types of bites, if you will, when it comes to eating the culture elephant. So you heard a little bit about me, just kind of my general CV. Typically, I like to help people understand just a little bit of kind of who I am. So I am a husband, married to my wife, Randy. I'm a father. I've got 2 boys. I've got a nearly 3-year-old named Brooks, and then I've got a 6-month-old named Jackson. I love technology, kind of get into a little bit as to how I fell into this career. And I also love being outdoors. I live out in really the farmland of Virginia, and it's just absolutely wonderful. I love waking up and just seeing a whole bunch of green space. Today, right now, I'm the director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency. And so we were established in November of 2019 to try and drive the strategy of how the Army was adopting commercial cloud and just really cloud computing, driving cloud native design principles, but really fundamentally trying to change the way that we understand how we can access infrastructure to test a hypothesis and deliver game-changing technology and warfighting mission capabilities to the United States Army and our soldiers. And so I've been on this journey now for just about 2 years. Prior to being with the Army, like they talked about, I was over in private sector. I worked over at a company called Pivotal. I was their federal CTO. Got to see the DoD and the intelligence community from the outside looking in, and that was really interesting. You got to see kind of this commonality of a challenge across really every single part of the DoD and the IC, and really culture got in the way. And I think that's one of the things that really makes me excited to talk about culture today. Is just this is something that we are all struggling with, and is something that I think is something we need to talk a little bit more about, and not so much this kind of hand wavy kind of way, but like these really pointed ways. How do we actually start to deliver capabilities, understand how we can kind of change this culture that is so risk averse, that is so focused on kind of just doing their one thing really well rather than coming together to do the mission really well together. Prior to that, I was over at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. A lot of the way that I see the world and technology and kind of this iterative change and deliver value quickly were really kind of codified and solidified in my experiences over at NGA. And prior to that, I was a contractor supporting both the Department of State as well as the Department of Defense. So I've seen this world from a few different angles. Been really fortunate to have the career that I've had. But a little bit deeper than that, there are a few things that kind of make me tick. And I think that this is really important. If I'm going to talk to you about changing cultures, you kind of need to understand my heart and the way that I see the world. I really have this desperate need to understand others and for people to understand me. Far too often when I get into conversations at work, I kind of feel like people need to understand my intent, because sometimes the things that we do kind of feels a little bit abrasive, feels a little bit passionate, feels a little bit kind of challenging. And if people don't understand that my intent is good intent, trying to drive on the mission, sometimes that can feel really caustic. And so I feel like people really need to understand me when they work with me, but also vice versa. I want to understand what makes people tick. Typically, when I hire people, I'll ask three questions: is what makes you feel wanted, what makes you feel enabled, and what makes you feel challenged? Because I want to understand, like, there's something that they think that they bring to the table, and there's something that makes them feel wanted as a part of a team. Like, why are you there to be a part of a team? And I want to be able to draw that out of them. But also at the same time, like, there's probably some capabilities, some resources, something that they need to feel, enabled in their journey of what they're going to do, because they're going to be challenged. And so what makes you feel challenged? What kind of makes you feel that you're growing and learning as part of a team? So kind of that desperate need to understand others and for people to understand me, I think, is important, because when we talk about changing a culture, is we have to understand each other's intent and our heart. And I think that that's really important. I am a college dropout. Most people, I think know this, probably don't know the full story, and I will not share it. But I kind of navigate this world kind of feeling like I've got my wonderful GPA there. Is that I've got this kind of dropout GPA, and it's more so this realization that there's always something to learn. There's always something to be challenged about. We don't have everything figured out. And I think that's kind of this insatiable desire to continue to grow and to learn and get after that next big thing. Another thing about me, I'm very passionate. Shy of college, when I get into hobbies, I go all in. And so typically, some new thing that enthralls me or really intrigues me, I really just dive into it wholeheartedly. And really, this world of modern IT and culture change, I think, is something that I'm just really insatiable when it comes to the appetite to learn and to grow and to collaborate with others. I also pride myself in being very pragmatic. So oftentimes I'm not the creative one. I'm more the logical one. And sometimes when things don't strike me as too terribly pragmatic or logical, I really have a hard time in getting to understand it. And so hopefully you hear kind of this kind of logical approach to culture change today that becomes something a bit more tangible is kind of a hope there. And then also I analyze everything. I wouldn't say that I over analyze everything, but I definitely analyze everything. I want to put things in context and understand it. So hopefully I'm going to create some context around this topic. So just a moment of honesty. This was really hard for me. I shared this recently on LinkedIn, is when DEF reached out and said, hey, like, would you be willing to chat? I didn't know specifically what the actual topic of DEF 2021 was. And I was like, hey, there's this topic I've been wanting to talk about. It's actually eating the culture elephant. And they're like, oh, well, that'll work out, because this whole entire conference is around culture and actually driving an innovative culture. And even though I wanted to do this, this was really, really hard. And hopefully we'll explain a little bit why. It'll definitely be bite number 5 that'll really impact that one. But this was really, really hard for me, because I was sitting and I was asking myself, like, why am I talking about culture change? One of my old coworkers, Jason Hess, we were in a meeting one time, and after the meeting, he was like, Paul, you really need to apply the WAIT strategy. And I was like, what is the WAIT strategy? And he was like, it is the why am I talking strategy. And so sometimes I don't think too hard before I speak. And so I've been trying to be better at that. And so I was thinking really hard as to why I'm even feel inclined to give this talk. And I'll just be very honest with you guys. I have no clue. I kind of have a clue, but I really just have no clue. And I hope to say this in the way that, like, don't take my word for anything. If there's anything that I say today that resonates, like, go and chew and reflect and study it. See if it makes sense to you. And if it doesn't make sense, please reach back out, because there's something that I learned along the way in unpacking this, and I hope that it'll do the same for you. So with that being said, I hope this resonates. I hope this lands. And if there's something that kind of enlightens you about this, or something that your research enlightens you about, please reach out and let me know. Okay, it sounds all heavy, so we're going to make things a little bit lighter. First off, if you love memes, and I love memes, the memes around culture change are very much sad, very much true, sometimes fun. I think my favorite one on this one is Thumper. So if you follow South Park, you will know Thumper, the ski instructor, in the sense of if you try to change a company culture, you're going to have a bad time. Someone asked me, actually Colin asked me, was like, hey, like, are you going to call out that it's extremely, extremely, extremely hard? And the answer is yes. I think we all know that. But the whole entire point of this talk is how do we maybe understand it a little bit, and how do we maybe have an approach to change it a little bit? And so with that, let's dive into it. So eating the culture elephant in 5 bites. Like I said before, it's not like 5 individual chews and we're all done. But these are the 5 kind of bites, if you will, when it comes to changing a culture. And if you have watched Ted Lasso, I think everyone has been like, oh, we're doing it wrong. He's just got everything figured out. This like slow, persistent, just like makes it happen kind of attitude when it comes to leadership to change a culture. So absolutely, there's some Ted Lasso muse that you're going to hear a little bit in this talk. Okay. Bite number 1, creating space. So as part of the reflection and diving into this, I was like, man, I know I've said some things around culture change. And so I perused my LinkedIn and comments that I and others have made around this. You might see a few screenshots. But one of the books that really resonated with me when it came to leadership and when it came to creating a culture around what it is that you like want to do and how you want to structure yourself and how you want to see yourself as a team was Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last. And one of the comments that he made was, it's really the domain of those in power, the domain of those in leadership to create space to change a culture. I myself am a benefactor of this. And when I first started at the Army, there are a number of people that engaged with me and was like, hey, like, we're so excited you're here. Like, you're going to change a culture. And I was like, what? It sounds like a really weird thing for an individual to do. And the reality is my leadership then and even now created space for me to build a community and a team of people where we demonstrate a change culture. So it starts with creating space. Someone in power has to create space. And it has to be space that essentially is not like we're just going to create space for the sake of creating space to change a culture. It's got to start to come with it a little bit of what is that purpose that's a little bit bigger than you and your desire to feel comfortable that you're trying to wrap this culture around. Like if you're going to be changing a culture, it can't just be, hey, we're going to be kind to each other and call it a day. There's got to be something a little bit bigger than that. And I'll unpack a little bit of that why here a little bit later on. But you've got to tie it a little bit to something. And what you also have to do is you have to understand, like, sometimes you can, like, coalition the willing, create some space for yourselves, but oftentimes it's those that actually have the power and see the need to create space, that something needs to change. And sometimes in that leadership, it's acknowledging, I'm not necessarily going to be part of that changed culture, but I need to create space to start to protect it. And that's why I think this is really the domain of leaders, to be able to create this space. It is a really hard thing to do, but I don't think it's the hardest thing to do. That's why I say it's the second hardest bite to chew, because there are some things that are harder than this. But first and foremost, you have to create space. That space is the paramount starting block, if you will, when it comes to changing a culture. And if you haven't created that space for changing a culture, I would argue you're really going to struggle. Because in Simon Sinek's Leaders Last, like, it is the job of leaders to create this essentially circle of safety, because within that circle of safety, you're gonna get into some really hard times, but you can't be fighting each other for it. And so you've got to really be able to create. Really create that space. I made a comment a little bit ago to sharing my friend Brian's comment on LinkedIn, and this is prior to joining the Army. This was about a year before I came on board. And I was like, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this world where the DoD and the military kind of realizes that when it comes to tapping into good talent, like one of the first things we have to be able to do is be able to identify them and give them a space to actually thrive. And I think a lot of the great talent that we have is desperate for uh, space for a changed culture or a opportunity to change the culture, to be created for them to go and collaborate and partner and thrive. And I see a lot of that in DEF. I see that a lot in the people that participate there. And I think it's something we need to lean into. All right. So the second one, right after creating some space, is starting to draw a line. And it's part of that circle of safety. Simon said in his book as well, is it's the domain of leaders to understand and to direct who is and who is not within that circle of safety. And this is all about saying what is and what is not acceptable as part of the culture that you want to create. Far too often we say like what it is that we want to do, like this is how we're going to act. But rarely do we call out like the way you are not going to act. And I think that is really important is that second piece. Because far too often we create room where things could be perceived as the way that we want to act, but we don't explicitly call out the things that are not the ways that we want to act. And you can choose your own traits, you can choose your own principles, you can choose your own things that kind of make up your culture and how you want to treat each other. But I would argue there's kind of some three common ones. Is you probably need some kindness in there. You definitely need some honesty in there. And for sure, when it comes to hitting some hard times, you're going to need some humility in there as well. We'll probably choose some others. And we chose some others. We put out the cultural principles of the ECMA. So everyone that works within my organization, as well as everyone that works with my organization, they know what they're supposed to be getting and what they're not supposed to be getting when it comes to working for my team. And the same thing for the people on my team. When it comes to myself and the leadership, they know how we are going to act and how we are going to treat them as human beings. And this is setting the ground rules and the expectation, which is kind of small, and you can find it on LinkedIn, which you don't find there in the top. And I'll be really explicit about this. You've got to say what you are not accepting. And here's the sentence. We need you to be willing to forego dishonesty, contempt, scheming, power, short-term gain, and bureaucracy as tools at work. If you believe any of those tools have a time and a place, this is not the team for you. And it's so true. Far too often you see people that when they hit those challenging times, they start to act in certain ways. And we just have to be clear that that's not the way that we play. And it's our job as leaders to hold that line. I'll go a little bit deeper here in bite number 3. It's also the job of the people on the team to hold that line. But first, we have to set the expectation of what is and is not acceptable. And then finally, this is hard to do in the sense where sometimes this could be seen as kind of this cool club that no one else can attain. You can't play the cool kids club. I've been a part of a culture change movement that started as the cool kids club. It did not work too terribly well. So please don't do that. As I say here, don't tolerate brilliant jerks. It's also possible to drive innovative change and just not be an asshole. So let's remember that one. And so it takes me into my third bite. So when you create space and you draw a line, sometimes kind of be seen as this thing that like that's this other thing, that's this cool kids club. That can't be the case. You have to build a bridge. You have to find a way to meet people where they are and demonstrate to them like, hey, that's the culture that you grew up in. Those are the things that drove incentives for the way that you work. That's not the way that we work. But sometimes you have to demonstrate that in kind of this persistent manner that shows them like, hey, like this is how you become a part of this changed culture with us, and this is how you become an advocate. It's impossible to grow a culture if people don't see a pathway to being a part of the team. And that's really critical is oftentimes, kind of these startups, if you will, to demonstrate a change culture start as these small teams, and far too often they kind of fizzle out as small teams. And I would argue it's because we don't create a bridge. We don't create a mechanism for others to join us. I've heard from a few soldiers in the Army that I'm the only person in their career that ever told them that it was okay to say I don't know, which is heartbreaking. But it was one of those things where I had to say that a few different times before they realized they could just say like, I don't know. And be like, cool. How are we going to figure this thing out together? And those moments are moments for people to realize like, oh, okay, I could be a part of this. If this is all about how I learn and how I grow, like that's sweet. I can play this game. Um, and so when we meet people where they are and we demonstrate, hey, there are different things when it comes to how we measure value and teamwork. You slowly build those people and you create a bridge for them to come and join your community. And I would argue, kind of the point I made about drawing the line and teaching others to draw the line is we really want to be able to create bridge builders. People that have this new expectation of how we're going to treat each other, but then they themselves are the ones that drawing people in. And I think that's just so important that we have to like really lean into people more and more and more and give them a pathway to see the new way that we want to be doing business, the new way we want to be working with each other. And that's not to say, that we kind of gray the line, if you will, for what is and is not acceptable. We can be, explicit about that, but we have to create a bridge for them to join us. And a great book, The Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook. This thing is practical, but also a little bit absurd. But if you think of like how to fend off a shark, which I hope none of us find ourselves in trying to fend off a shark, just the thing I wanted to call out, it's better to stay in groups. Don't be alone. So it's better to build a community and have a group. And I will say, worst case is to use the lead tasso approach to build a bridge, to try and draw people in. I would say you should not demonstrate to be the worst version of what your culture can be in order to have your team kind of come together in a oh no, we have to address this scenario. But yeah, please don't use the lead tasso approach. It's very much a break glass in case of emergency. And I would argue there's probably a few other things you can do before you go the lead tasso route. All right. This is honestly, I think the easiest thing, but far too often people miss this one. If we're going to demonstrate a change culture, be super kind to each other, be honest with each other. Rarely are people looking from the outside in and saying, hey, that team that never does anything of value for our mission is pretty cool. I want to be a part of it. I don't think I've ever heard that in my life. We have to understand why we have a mission, what outcomes need to be delivered, and therefore demonstrating that this change culture and this different way of doing things is actually capable of meeting those mission needs. And this is something I think like so many people miss. They almost get so enthralled with like how they just simply work and treat each other. They kind of miss the mark on like, why do you exist? Like, why are you even there in the first place? It's to find those great people that are so passionate about what to do. And this is why I say in the very beginning, when you're going to create space, you have to understand a little bit of the intent as to why you're doing that. And I'll really unpack this in the fifth bite. But you have to tie it to the why. You have to tie it to the why. There has to be an outcome. There has to be a thing that you're driving after. And if you're missing that, you're just going to be the nice guys hanging out in the corner that aren't delivering mission value. And people aren't going to kind of have that moment of pause and be like, wait a second, they're doing something different. They're doing it a little bit differently, and they're delivering outcomes, I would argue, perhaps even at a speed and at a quality better than what I'm doing. There's something that draws people to be like, what are you doing? It actually looks like you're actually enjoying each other's company doing it. How is this happening? You've got to get to outcomes. But I'll be honest, I think it's the easiest thing. It's hard to deliver capabilities in the DoD. We've talked about that. We've talked about all the challenges that get in the way. But when you come together with the right people and the right attitude, it's not that hard. I honestly think this is the easiest bite to chew when it comes to changing the culture. It's just making sure that you focus on the why and that you are relentless getting after outcomes. I also think that you need to align to metrics of success that objectively kind of the culture you had has to acknowledge it. If you come with only the metrics of this new way of looking at things, sometimes you can just really talk past each other, and people think that you're actually not delivering value. So you need to deliver metrics that actually appeal to the objective standard when it comes to how value is measured, but sometimes you may think that that's a little bit skewed. You do need to come with new metrics of success, because then you want to kind of enlighten, have that aha moment of like, hey, you know what, like we've measured success this way and this was successful, but there's perhaps some better metrics that we can align to. And I think that that's really, really important. Especially then also internal to your culture. And I call this out, like, for instance, there's a difference between punishing failure and punishing not learning from failure. Right? Like we talk about, failing early and often. It's like, cool, you want to fail early and often so you can learn early and often and then apply what you learned. And so if we just start to demonstrate to our team, like, hey, failure or whatever, but if we fail to learn from this, that's when we have a problem. It changes the mindset, it changes the incentives, and it changes how people act on your team. So both internally to your culture as well as for your mission, you have to really change those metrics of what really matters. So hands down, the hardest bite to chew is consistency. We are imperfect beings. This is the thing that just, hope I don't get emotional, just wrecked me when I was thinking about, like, just talking about this talk, is there's so many things that we do that's just wrong. Even when we know that they're just wrong, and we don't want to, sometimes we're just crappy humans. And this is hard. It's so hard, but it's also the room that we have is this realization that we're just imperfect human beings. And it's really the moment you deviate from the culture that you want, you give room to the culture you had. It's the moment you deviate from delivering outcomes the way you know, you give room to the outcomes that you had. If we think that there's a different way of doing things to deliver better outcomes, we've just got to work to be consistent. You're not going to be consistent. I am never consistent, but that has to be the drive. And it's the reason why it's the hardest thing, and it's why you have to talk about, like, being enabled even when you're challenged. Is like when things get hard, oftentimes we go back to that place of fear and we just snap back, right? We come back like, well, you didn't do that thing before. It's like, whoa. I don't think that's the way that we're trying to play here. So there's this moment of pause and humility of being like, how could I have said it differently? How could I have done it differently? What could I have learned from it that I didn't apply? How can I be better? And I can't tell you the number of conversations I have around this. It is the thing that wrecked me studying this, because I have no clue why I'm talking about culture change, because I'm not a perfect person, man. But I do know that I care, and I do know that others care. And it's something that I think we all need to pause and reflect on as often as we possibly can and say, did I get it right? Did I not get it right? Is there something I can do about it? And even, like, if there's a person that you're wronged or a person that perhaps can help you, man, reach out. Reach out. So those are the 5 bites. I think we all know it's not just like 5 individual bites. Those are the 5 types of bites I think that matters when it comes to change in a culture. And in that moment of wrestling with this, this is what gave me that moment of we're good. Is one, if we look around, there are a lot of us. There really are. We say it's a small community, but I tell you, when you need someone, there's someone there. Far too often we feel alone. You're not alone. There are people within your services, within your agency, within your company, close to the things that you're doing, that care about the same things and want the same things. So the thing that gave me pause is, in my moment of imperfection, there are others that have the pieces that I don't have. And that's where we have power. That's where we have power. And in those moments, that's what helps me stay gritty. Because there's going to be some really painful moments. But that's the thing that lights me up. Are the other people around me that know what we're trying to shoot after and are just ready to get after it with us and want to demonstrate that honest, humble, and kind culture that just delivers amazing capabilities for our mission. I've had this comment for a while: is relentless, purposeful movement, and just this. We just have to have this drive. It has to keep going. We have to be persistent. We just have to keep getting after it. And so, as long as you've got that team around you, because you do have that team around you, even when you feel alone, you've got that team around you, and you acknowledge that, hey, maybe these, you might disagree, but these kind of 5 bites, these kind of 5 approaches to change in a culture, I think we can get there. I know we can get there. So we just have to be relentless in that pursuit. So I'm super thankful for the time. Thanks for letting me have a little bit of emotion on a Saturday morning. But I think this is just such an important thing that is tangible, is realistic, is pragmatic, is something that is demonstrated in numerous different places. We've seen some awesome changes in just the way that people interact with our team at the Army. It's now a joke. Some of the other day was in me. It was like, yeah, we know how hard it is to work with Paul's team because it's just complete opposite of what they're used to. It's just a team of people like, yeah, how can I help? Did I do something wrong? I'm so sorry. How can I make it better? How can I learn from it? And that's just, it's just the way that we're wired. Another person said, like, hands down, this is the best team. I'm just so thankful to be working for this team. Not illicit at all, but it's just one of those things where it's like, hey, what are your thoughts? I have no clue. Like, what do you think we should do? That sounds about right to me. We should just go get after it. Let's go slay it. Like that's not hard. It's just really not hard to do. You just have to create that space. You have to draw a line. You have to build a bridge. You have to deliver outcomes, and you have to keep fighting it at being consistent about it. And friends, it is very much possible. We've seen the outcomes, and we're growing the outcomes. So with that, that's the end of my chat. I think we've got a few minutes for a little Q&A, a little bit of exchange, but Michael, back to you for whatever you've got.
All right, thank you, Paul. Yes, we do have some time for Q&A, and to the audience, please keep dropping those questions in the Q&A tab, and I'll be pulling those for Paul. But first, let me just say, Paul, thank you for being like really open and honest, and in many ways, I guess, vulnerable. It's definitely clear how much you care about your team, about your team's culture, and it's also definitely clear how much you've reflected on that. It really comes through. So, thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, no worries.
So I'm going to draw a question that I definitely had, and then one shared by Kevin that are sort of in the same theme. I was going to ask you if you could share a time, or even just speak generally about when a team member kind of violated or stepped over those lines that you drew in bite number 2, and how you kind of think about going to hold yourself and to hold teammates accountable, balancing that with giving people a chance to grow, but also protecting the culture of the team and your other teammates. Kevin asked, have you run into any scenarios where teammates weren't initially on board with drawing that line with that bite, and how you navigated that?
Yeah. I've definitely experienced it a few different times. I'll say this without kind of really, outing anyone. I've had people who their natural inclination, like when times got tough, has been to kind of move and start to put up the walls for one, how they interacted with me, but then how also they interacted with other people, in the sense of like they start to like snap and they start to attack and they start to feel like they've got to protect themselves. One of the simple versions of this is I tell everyone that works with me to call me Paul, because I'm just another dude, and interact with teammates, ask some difficult questions, obviously have some difficult conversations, and all of a sudden, like the next time they're talking to me, I'm Mr. Puckett again. And I'm like, pause, hang tight. What's happening here? Why am I Mr. Puckett all of a sudden? And just kind of having those moments of being like, listen, you don't have to place yourself in this like buffer zone with me. I'm not about to like write you up, for calling me, Paul again. And that's this, like, there have been, I've described it before. It's kind of like, I've only had rescue animals my entire life. Um, and it's like, you raise your hand to go play, ball with somebody. All of a sudden your dog cowers in the corner because they're so used to, like, oh, that means that I'm going to get hit. It's like, I'm not going to hit you. So sometimes just realizing, like, hey, like, no, man, we're good. So I've had those one-on-ones. I've had a few different those one-on-ones where I'm like, listen, you don't have to go into that place of fear. You don't have to call me Mr. Puckett. You don't have to start to put up those walls. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say no. But we can't have you snapping at people. I've had some passive aggressive, not necessarily vindictive, but moves of people, kind of, and other people on my team, where I just have to call out, be like, hey, like, at some point, you've got to acknowledge that you give into the old way of doing business more than you should. I would argue it needs to be zero, but you fall into that trap when you really need to fall into the other trap of, like, I'm sorry, how can I help? And just having those conversations has lit a little bit of a light bulb in people where they're like, hey, as long as I just keep focusing on the outcome and the intent here, like, and I'm learning from kind of the moments that things don't go wrong, like, Paul's always going to give me space to try something more. And that's been reassuring to me, because then I've actually seen it where other members of the team hold each other accountable. I don't even have to be, involved. And it's just something where we just see the team grow closer and closer. And obviously, when that typically happens, outcomes increase all the more.
That's good. And that segues a little bit to one of our next questions, thinking about relationships within the team and sometimes about hierarchy. Jared posted a question, having just had a workbook club discussion about doing Agile right, where the question of a local versus global top for leadership arose. So Jared's asking, at what level do you think people can implement culture change? And I know in Bite One, on your presentation, you were talking about creating space. You said it's the domain of those with power to create space. Mm-hmm. But how do you think about people implementing culture change from different levels within the organization, not necessarily the top?
Yeah, well, that's why I say it comes from, it has to come from a position of power. One of the things that I chewed on is, I love her dearly. Sue Gordon gave a talk at INSA, and she talked about the role of men, and she was saying that for the longest time, men in the workplace have had the position of power, and the reason why she's been able to grow is there was that first mover that said, like, no, like, I recognize you as a leader, and I'm going to create space and cede power to you, and let you then grow and lead. And she said that for her, it was recognizing that there are people in a position of power that can either enable or destroy an opportunity. And so people in a position of power have to see that, even when there's like an uprising, you've got to be able to pause and listen, like, oh, there's actually value there, but you've got to be able to create that room. And so I think we've been so hierarchically driven. There is this kind of top-down power that needs to be kind of shared and given. But it's not to say that, like I said, those from the ground up say, like, this is the new way that we want to do business. But they're going to have to defend against those that may disagree with them. And if they're the ones that have always been in a position of power, that becomes challenging. So it's not to say that everything has to be top-down driven, but there is this acknowledgement where there is a relationship where the two have to come together and then say, no, this is the thing that we want to do. I also, from a how high can it start? Maybe there's an aspect in that question, which is, you've seen some very senior people say, like, oh, we need to have a change culture. We talk about the frozen middle. My hypothesis is the frozen middle are the ones that have been trained in all of the bad things that can happen if you take risks, right? Like that's it. I try to have this moment of empathy, like, why are you the way that you are? And they're the ones that are at their career where it's like, hey, like, you're about to have this position of leadership. You need to understand all the ways that, like, you could go down and go down hard. And I just think it's almost like we've trained it into them to be the frozen middle, to avoid the scary thing. And so at some point, it's going to meet that frozen middle. And the frozen middle, if they're too nervous or come from like that place of fear, they're not going to give up that space. And so I think it can start from the top, it can start from the bottom, but at some point we've got to meet and address all the pieces in between to go do the thing that we need to do.
Perfect. I know we just got a couple more minutes, but there are a lot of questions coming through. Let me ask you one kind of tactical question that I think would be really useful for folks. And then maybe we'll wrap on a bigger picture question. From a tactical perspective, Daniel is asking, how do you onboard new team members? Do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, um, onboard new team members into the culture. So like for instance, in hiring, we're thoughtful about the questions that we ask of people and trying to understand their emotional IQ. We've essentially copied the playbook of hiring from Defense Digital Service, not just understanding like people as a leader or a technologist, but also them as an empathetic leader and someone that has a level of emotional IQ where they know who they are and the value that they bring, but also the gaps that they have and being able to acknowledge that and that there's an opportunity in growth and learning. So we definitely bring that into our hiring process. But also when it comes to we're a small team, so we work with a number of organizations. There are a number of non-ECA members of people that I collaborate with and chat with all the time. For that, I think there's a certain type of person that recognizes what we're trying to do, and they realize rank doesn't matter. It's all about like whether I'm bringing ideas and value to actually solve the problem. I'm just going to be kind. I'm going to be honest. There's no reason to put up a front. It's just the way I need to just kind of work in order to just meet people in the ECMA where they are and where we need to go, because there's that shared intent. So when it comes to onboarding, I'll say people into the community, it's definitely not just me. It's all of the teammates across the board. But I think that there's this natural recognition that there's a difference, and even putting out the ECMA principles, I think helped kind of draw a line in the sand for people to like, that's the thing that I want to be a part of. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to be a part of that community and that team. And I would argue it's pretty apparent to see the difference between the two for someone that's just kind of looking for their next, promotion versus someone that's actually working to just get amazing things done. And they know that, their ability to grow in their career is just going to be a natural byproduct of just doing awesome stuff with great people.
Right on. Okay. Last question for you, Paul. To many culture change, especially in large and complex organizations, it can feel nearly impossible. And sometimes the natural thought that follows that is it's much easier to build a new organization from the ground up. It's just more practical to do that and set the culture the way you want it than to try and move this elephant or eat this elephant. And I know you said before that culture change, it'll never feel quick. And even if you were to build a new organization, those new cultural norms will still take time. So curious if you'd share, with the ECMA, were you building that from the ground up, or did you engage in sort of that change shift over time? And you've also mentioned the organizational strangler pattern. So if you'd speak to that and how that interplays here.
Yeah, so the context for that is not just creating a new organization, but also having the authorities. Like sometimes we'll create a new organization, say like, oh, you're change culture, but the actual authority to go and do the thing that's tied to the mission still lives with somebody else. So you're just like constantly like, hey, like, can I be a part of the team? Will you listen to me? So part of that organizational strangler pattern I was talking about is you can either create kind of a thing internal that's their new way of doing business. You want to kind of have this culture and you kind of grow it from the inside out, or you create this wholly new thing and you slowly move authorities and roles into that new thing, and then you let it grow and slowly dismantle the old. The ECMA is more so the former. We were born as a directorate and an office in the CIO. And the CIO G6 at the time recognized the need for space and wanted to demonstrate that growth and change, and that has only persisted over time. And more so, I would say, from like a roles and authorities perspective, we've just become tighter collaborators with others. Is we've had like, hey, you now have the role and the authority for driving the execution of services in the cloud that was not held before, so that authority came in. But when it came to how we did that, we reached out to those that have a role in that domain and said, hey, come be a part of the collaborative community and team. So I would argue that we are more sort of like growing from the inside out with the ECMA, but there's also a flavor of like it's sitting in the CIO G6, which is atypical for a services delivery capability in the Army. So I think for that, it's perhaps seen from the outside by others as this separate entity that essentially is now pulling role and authority into it. So, but that strangler pattern can take a few different. One, if you're trying to grow from the inside up, obviously much harder because you essentially still have the way that value is seen and the way that culture is incentivized as everyone around you. Whereas when you're that whole new thing, you can essentially from the ground up say this is the way that we want to be doing business. But the authority of the mission is the thing that kind of varies between the two. And I think that's a challenge for many is they'll create this new thing, but they won't actually have the authority to do much. And in a world that essentially very much appeals to rank more so than the right idea, that's a challenging thing to do. And I think you've got to yield the two very especially. For instance, I'm a tier 2 SES. I've talked to the leaders that did it. The only reason I did is to create space from a rank perspective to then establish a new way of doing business, that it's ideas and not rank that drives our movement. But you've got to, it's back to seeding power. You've got to seed that certain type of power to create space to do things a little in a different way.
Well, great insights. Thank you very much for spending your Saturday morning with us.
No worries.
I know there are more questions that the audience have been bringing in. Please find Paul on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Connect with him and engage and keep asking those questions. Paul, thanks for being with us this morning. We're going to go ahead and outro to a short break